Right, here's a few of the records from my collection representing the great Victorian poet Alfred Lord Tennyson. That's an Argo issue from the early 70s, I believe. I did a series of records. That's another one from the Argo collection. It was readings by actors mostly. This is a BBC radio LP from the 60s. I think it actually gives one or two of the original wax cylinder recordings as well. These are recordings by an expert on the dialect poetry that Tennyson wrote from his Lincolnshire roots. And this is the 7-inch 33 RPM vinyl record that was put out in 1969 by the Tennyson Society, and it compiled pretty much all that survived of the 30-odd wax cylinder recordings that Tennyson made. Unfortunately, they weren't particularly well stored. Mould at them, they were soft wax, which is like a soapy material. Mould at most of them, but this is what survives. There's one or two other tracks on different records, and I think one on the British Library CD as well, which also gives a bit of Tennyson. It may not be here, but this is most of them. This is the tracks that appear on this record. Starting with the Charge of the Light Brigade. Let's have a listen.
This tape is derived from recordings made by Tennyson between 1890 and 1892 on soft wax cylinders supplied to him by Thomas J. Edison for use on an old-style phonograph. Tennyson was then from 80 to 83 years old, and the art of recording was still in its infancy. These recordings were therefore, no doubt from the beginning, far from perfect according to modern standards, and they have in the course of 75 years suffered greatly from the effects of time and use, and from the processes of recasting in shellac and re-recording first on disc and afterwards on tape. In order to get the best out of the resulting tape, it is recommended that it should be played only to small groups so that all can get near the record player, and that each listener should follow the text of the poems with book or copy.
Alfred Lord Tennyson reads from his own poems. First, The Charge of the Light Brigade. Elaine's Song of Love and Death, from Lancelot and Elaine. From the beginning of the second stanza, love art thou sweet, then bitter death must be.
Right, side 2 of this 1969 issue by the Tennyson Society. 3 more of the wax cylinder recordings, and they're introduced by Charles Tennyson, CMG, who was his grandson. As you can see, it's the Heavy Brigade, Northern Farmer, and Come Into the Garden, Maud.
Charge of the Heavy Brigade, read by Alfred Lord Tennyson, up to the line, lost one and all were the words uttered in our dismay.
Out the hill, out the hill, out the Russian, out the horsemen drew to the valley, dead, for scarlet and scarlet 300 were riding by with the voice of the Russian lances or hose. And he called, left wheel into life, and they wheeled him away. And he looked at the horses and horses he knew not why, and he turned off, bound to give out his trumpet to sound. The charge of the road on ahead as he waved his leg to the gallant 300 who swore he would never die. Oh! Up the hill, up the hill, up the hill, followed the Heavy Brigade. The trumpet began the charge, and the fight of the fight. Thousands of horsemen are gathered there on the height, with a wing pushed out to the left and a wing to the right. And foes who escaped. But he dashed up alone through the great grey slope of Ben, swayed his sabre and held his own like an Englishman there and then. All in a moment followed with force, 3 that were next in their fiery course, wedged themselves in between horse and horse, fought for their lives in the narrow gap they had made, all down, and up the hill, down to the Heavy Brigade. Fell like a cannon shot, burst as the thunderbolt, crashed like a hurricane. Broke through the mass from below, drove through the midst of the foe, plunged up and down to and fro, rolled flashing blow upon blow. Brave in the skillets and greys, whirling their sabres in flashes of light. And some of us all in amaze who were helpless and away from the fight of our only standing and gaze. When the dark muffled Russian crowd folded its wings the left and from the right, and poured them around like a cloud. Oh, that was the sound that the battle will be, when our own good red coat sank from sight like drops of blood in his heart. And we turned to each other, whispering all dismayed. Oh, lost one and all were the words uttered in our dismay.
From the Northern Farmer, New Style, beginning with the 3rd line of the 3rd stanza, thou wilt not marry for money, thou sweet upon parson's lass, down to the end of the 6th stanza.
Thou wilt not marry for money, thou sweet upon parson's lass. No, thou wilt marry for love, and we both marry. Yeah, just sit there for a while. I was ringing the bell. She gave up notice. It was full still. There was a funny talk. Walk. Got up. Walk the step. Stop. Look, this book. That's coming. I knows what happened to the front. Wasn't I class to the lessons this time when I was a lad? But I know the crackers and the doctors in position. You don't know what is money. You know what money is. What I'm doing. What they need to know. Yeah, but you want to do. Figure it out. Watching is good like this and that's out.
Right, the last recording on the Tennyson wax recordings 7-inch record was the Northern Farmer, the new style. Now this record, issued in the 60s by the Lincolnshire Association, presents Edward Campion reading 2 poems in the Lincolnshire dialect by Alfred Tennyson. Tennyson was a clergyman's son, and he'd grown up listening to the rural workers, and he was very affected by their fascinating accents. And in later life, when he wrote his poetry, he imitated, how he remembered their dialect, and these are his representations of those dialects, which are long gone. So we're going to start with the old style, actually, the Northern Farmer, read by Edward Campion, who was an expert on the poems, the dialect poems by Tennyson. This is notes from the record. Just give you a second to read it. Right, let's have a go. Have a listen. That's the label of the record. Right.
We rest a being so long, and me a ligging here alone. Nurse, that doctor nurse, why doctors have been in a going. Says that I want to know more ale, but I bean't a fool. Get me my ale, for I bean't a going to break me rule. Doctors, they knows nought, for it says what's nowhere's clean. No sort of kind of used to say the things that I do. I've had me pint ale every night since I've been here, and I've had me quart every market night for 40 years. Parsons are being likewise, and are sitting here in my bed. The hummock is a taking a yow to his son, my friend to say. And I told me my sins, and tithe were due, and I get it in on. I done my duty by 'em as I had done by the land. Land of my beard. I reckons I not so much to learn, but I cast up that I did about Bessie Marish's bairn. To a nose I allus voted with squire and church and state, and in the worst of times I was never again the rate, and I allus come to his church before my Sally were dead, and heard him a bumming away like a butter clock over me head. I never known what I meant, but I thought I had something to say, and I thought I said what I hoped to say, and I come to wear. Bessie Morris's bear. I know she had it to be. Might have been there, for she were a bad un, she. Shiver, I kept 'em, my lass, thou will understand. I done my duty by 'em, as I had done by the land. But parson a comes and a goes, and I says it hears thee and free. The Almighty's a taking a yow to his son, my friend, says he. I won't say a man be liars, though someone said it in yes, but he reads 1 sermon a week, and I is to 3rd of me west. Do you mind the rest, me lass? No, I wasn't born then. There was a boggle in it. I often heard him be saying, most like a butterbug. for I heard him about and about, but I stubbed him up with a lot, and raved and rambled him out. Keep, as it were, for the fun of there a lad of his face down with the royal enemies, before I come to the place. Nooks, or Thimbleby, 200 had shot him as dead as a nail. Nooks were hanged for it up at size. But get me my hell. Do but look at the west. They weren't not feared for a cow. Nought at all but bracken and furze. And look at it now, where it was nought a hacker, and now there's lots of fear. 4 yows upon it, and some on it down the sea. No but a bit on its left, and I mean to stub it at fall. Done it a year I mean, and run plough through it and all, if God Almighty and Parson and not let me alone. Me we 800 acre of squires, and land me on. Do God Almighty know what there's doing attacking of me? I be't one of saws here a being and yonder a beat. And Squire'll be some mad and all, dear, and I am managed for Squire come Michaelmas 30 years. About to 10 old Jones, as ain't got a half of the sense, and about to 10 young Robins, and never mended a fence. But God Almighty, I must take me, and take me now. We have the cows to go off, and Thurnaby horns to plough. Look how quality smiles when they see us mare passing by. Says to the sen, no doubt, what a man I be a sewerly. For they knows what I be for Squire, since first to come to the hall. I done my duty by Squire, and I done my duty by hall. Squire's in London, and the one I reckons will let her ride. For us to hold the land out of me, that muddles me quite. Sartin steward I be, that I won't never give it to Jones. No, there are more to Robins, and never rambles the stones. But someone'll come after me, mayhap, with his kettle of steam, hussing and mares in the blessed fields with the devil's horn to him. Sin I mun die, though a life there says is sweet, but sin I mun die, for I couldn't bear to see. What are they standing there for, and doesn't bring me the hell? Doctors at 2 at their last, and there's all that is old tale. How weird brat rules for doctor, and there's no more than a fly. Get me my hell, I tell her, and if I mun die, I mun die.
So that was the old dialects that he remembered as a boy, and I suspect that the newer one is going to be the one that was more sort of contemporary, you know, when he was writing the poems, more recent, the new style. So let's turn over and get to the new style. Right, side 2, The Northern Farmer, new style. Read by Edward Campion, who was an expert on Tennyson's dialect poetry. And this was a recording made in the 1960s by the Lincolnshire Society.
Doesn't he hear me horse's legs as they canters away? Property, property, property. That's what I hears them say. Property, property, property. Sam, there's a ass for the pains. There's more sense in one of his legs nor in all thy brains. Whoa! There's a crowd up look with a sound. Yon's Parson's house. Doesn't they know that a man will be either a man or a mouse? Time to think on it then, for there'll be 20 to wake. Property, property, whoa then, whoa, let me hear me sense speak. Me and the mother, Sammy, has been a-talking of thee. Thou's been talking to mother, and she been a-telling it me. Thou'll not marry for money, thou sweet of a parson's lass. No, thou'll marry for love, and we both of us think the ass. sees her there go by. Stands there. There was ringing the bells. She's a beauty, that things. And so is scores of girls, them as has money and all. What's a beauty? The flowers, blowers, but property sticks, and property growers. Don't be stunned. Dear time, I knows what makes me so mad. Weren't I crazed for the lasses me send when I were a lad? But I know the Quaker fella as often as told me this: don't thou marry for money, but go where money is. And I went where money were, and the mother come to hand with lots of money laid by, and a nicest bit of land. Baby, she weren't a beauty, I never give it a thought. But weren't she as good to cuddle and kiss as a lass as ain't nowt? Parson's lass ain't nowt, and she went in out when he's dead. Mun be a governess lad or summat, an addler breed. Why? For he's nobbut a culet, and we ain't never get his sign clear. And he made the bed as a legs on before he come to the shear. And then he come to the parish with lots of varsity did. Stuck to his tail they did, and he ain't got shut on him yet. And he ligs on his back in a grip, we know to lend him a shove worse nor a far-weltered yow. For Sammy, he married for love. Love, what's love? Like and love they last and her money do, making them go together as they've good right to do. Couldn't I love thy mother because of her money laid by? Nay, for I loved her a vast sight more for it. Reason why? Hey, and my mother says thou wants to marry the lass. Comes of a gentleman bird. And we both of us thinks there's ass. Worth and property, will the ass as near as mare's nout. Worth and will the dang the bees as fellas out. Break me a bit of the hash for his ear, lad, out of the fence. Gentleman burn. What's gentleman burn? Is it shillings and pence? Property's everything here. And, Sammy, I'm blessed if it isn't the same up yonder, for them as has it's the best. 'Tisn't them as has money as breaks in houses and steals. Them as has coats to the backs and takes the regular meals. No, but it's them as never knows where a meal's to be had. Take my word for it, Sammy. The poor in a lump is bad. Them are the fathers that sees mun have been a lazy lot. For work mun have gone to the get-in whenever money was got. The other, I almost know. Leastways his money was hid. But he tilled and moiled his thing dead, and he died a good un he did. Look that here where Rigglesby Beck comes out with the hill. Father run up to the farm, and I runs up to the mill, and I run up to the brig, and that thou live to see. And if thou marries a good un, I'll leave the land to thee. Them's me notions, Sammy, whereby I means to stick. But if thou marries a bad un, I'll leave the land to Dick. Come up, property, that's what I hears him say. Property, canter and canter away.
Right, this is a further recording of Coming to the Garden Maud, but it's with introduction from this LP record of, I think it was actually a radio programme, BBC record. I'm not sure what the date of this record was now, if it's got it on here or not. It's 1960s anyway. And it's John Betjeman introduces a recording made in 1890 of Tennyson reading from Maud. That's the record itself and the label. 33 RPM vinyl record.
In 1890, Thomas Edison, the American inventor, sent over an American colonel to England to record the 3 most famous Anglo-Saxon people on his new phonograph of wax cylinders. And those three people were Gladstone, Queen Victoria, and Tennyson the poet. Gladstone sent a message which was read out by somebody else onto the cylinders. Queen Victoria declined to do it, but Tennyson, who was by 1890 80 years old and just recovered from a serious illness, was so interested in science, and he always was all his life, that he of course did it. And he made a lot of recordings of his poems onto these wax cylinders. Unfortunately, they were put in a box near the heating pipes in his house at Farringford in the Isle of Wight, and they melted. So you can only hear little bits of them today, and there's a noise like the roaring of the sea through them. But you do actually hear Tennyson's voice. This is the stanza the poet reads, the last stanza of the first part of the poem Maud. She's coming, my own, my sweet, were it ever so airy a tread, my heart would hear her and beat. Were it earth in an earthy bed, my dust would hear her and beat. Had I lain for a century dead, would start and tremble under her feet, and blossom in purple and red. Now hear Tennyson chanting it out.
She's coming, my own, my sweet, were it ever so airy a tread, my heart would hear her and beat. Were it earth in an earthy bed, my dust would hear her and beat. Had I lain for a century dead, would start and tremble under her feet, and blossom in purple.
Did you notice a slight Lincolnshire accent in Tennyson's voice when he was reading that? Well, Lincolnshire was always with him. He loved it more than anywhere else. He was born there in 1809 at Somersby near Louth on the Wolds, and his father was the rector of Somersby, and the Tennyson children were 11 in all, 7 sons and 4 daughters. And highly eccentric they were in that little rectory, which is still there at Somersby, and when you look at it, you wonder how on earth they could all have fitted in there. They must have seemed amazing to the peasants round about, because they used to run about the lanes shouting out their poetry. Alfred and his brother Charles used to go down to the sea at Mablethorpe and chant their poems to the waves. They used to act in a special sort of theatre they made for themselves in the rectory. They didn't go to school very much for a time. Tennyson went to the Louth Grammar School, but mostly they taught themselves at home. The rector died, and the family, when Tennyson was 28, left that rectory at Somersby, and it was a great grief to them, because they loved the garden and the trees and the brook at the bottom of the garden, and it's still very much the same there as it was in Tennyson's time. And here is Cecil Day-Lewis reading the very tender lines Tennyson wrote in Memoriam about that rectory garden.
Unwatched the garden bough shall sway, the tender blossom flutter down. Unloved that beech will gather brown, this maple burn itself away. Unloved the sunflower shining fair, ray round with flames her disk of seed, and many a rose carnation feed with summer spice the humming air. Unloved by many a sandy bar, the brook shall babble down the plain at noon, or when the lesser wain is twisting round the polar star. Uncared for, gird the windy grove and flood the haunts of hern and crake, or into silver arrows break the sailing moon in creek and cove, till from the garden and the wild a fresh association blow, and year by year the landscape grow familiar to the stranger's child. As year by year the labourer tills his wonted glebe or lops the glades, and year by year our memory fades from all the circle of the hills.
Right, side 2 of this lovely BBC LP from actually 1970. It was a broadcast made in 1970, and it's Betjeman and Tennyson's grandson, Charles, discussing his humour.
Tennyson wasn't always solemn and sentimental, as people suppose. Here's Sir Charles Tennyson to tell a story about him in his old age.
He was out one day sitting on the lawn at Farringford with a girl who was a great friend of the family and he was very fond of, called Pinky Ritchie her name was. And they were sitting quietly together, and suddenly he turned round to her and said, "Pinky, your lace too tight. I heard your stays creak." And poor Pinky was so upset that she got up and ran into the house. Indeed, she was so upset that she thought of creeping off and going home and not coming down to lunch. But finally she thought better of it, and she came down to lunch, hoping nobody would notice her. But as soon as she got into the room, Tennyson, who was standing in front of the fireplace, began telling the story. And he said, I turned round to her and said, "Pinky, I heard your stays creak." And she got up and ran into the house. And when she'd gone, I found it was my own braces.
So well did Tennyson remember Lincolnshire.
But another track from this lovely LP. It's Charles Tennyson, the last person who was alive at the time who could actually remember actually meeting Tennyson himself, recalling his boyhood memories.
I suppose I'm the last person alive who has any at all intimate recollections of Tennyson. Of course, it's nearly 77 years since he died at the age of 83. He was just 83, and I was approaching the end of my 13th year, so that I was quite old enough to have a fairly strong impression of him. And there were circumstances which rather threw us together. Of course, I was his grandson, and then my father died at the age of just over 31 when I was 6, and that perhaps intensified the interest which my grandparents took in my brothers and myself, so that I had many opportunities of seeing him. Of course, 77 years is a very long time. Nevertheless, my memories of him are extraordinarily vivid, and because he was the most extraordinary personality in a very long life. He's by far the most impressive and singular personality that I have ever come across. He was very tall, well over 6 feet high, very broad, very powerfully made. He had very large hands with curiously square fingertips, and somebody once said that they looked to be fit for kneading clay or dough, and I think that was a very good description. Then he had a very tall head, which rose to a sort of an egghead type of crown, rather bald, and then fringed by a rather untidy sort of fringe of very dark hair. His hair never changed colour hardly at all. And then he had, as everyone knows, in his old age, rather a long, grizzled beard. He was very dark and swarthy, much more like a Spaniard than an Englishman. He had very, very dark eyes with rather heavy lids, and he was terribly short-sighted. He was very aquiline in features. And one thing which added greatly to the impressiveness and the singularity of his appearance was the clothes which he always wore. Now, he always, until the end of his life, wore the same style of clothes. I've very nearly said the same clothes, which might not have been far from the truth, that he had worn in the reign of King William IV, when he was a young man with his brothers and his university friends. And he always wore the same type of clothes as he'd worn then, which I remember particularly, a long sleeveless sort of Spanish cloak with a velvet collar, dark blue or black, and a large black wide-awake hat with very broad brim, felt hat, And then he nearly always wore a sort of John Bull frock coat, halfway between a tail coat and a frock coat, with very big purchase pockets at the sides, and rather baggy trousers, which, as he went a little bit over at the knees in old age, it made his legs look rather like the hind legs of an elephant. He was a tremendous walker. He walked every morning and many afternoons as well. And he observed ceaselessly as he walked. And he also composed, I feel sure, a great deal at that time.